Nobody tells you that healing can feel like falling apart. Nobody tells you that the moment your nervous system begins to actually recover, begins to release the tension it has been holding for years, sometimes for decades, it can feel from the inside like something is going wrong rather than something finally going right. Nobody tells you that the tears that arrive unexpectedly in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday with no obvious trigger and no clean explanation might not be a sign of regression. That the sudden fatigue that settles into your bones after a period of genuine emotional work might not be weakness. That the strange, disorienting sense of not quite knowing who you are anymore, the groundlessness that can accompany real inner change, might not be a crisis. It might be healing. Not healing as it is usually portrayed, triumphant, linear, increasingly calm, progressively more together, but healing as it actually tends to occur in the human nervous system, messy, non-linear, sometimes uncomfortable in ways that are difficult to distinguish from the inside from simply feeling worse. This is one of the least discussed and most important aspects of genuine psychological recovery, and it sits at the heart of everything we're going to explore today. Because if you don't know what nervous system healing actually looks like, if you don't recognize its real signs, including the ones that feel counterintuitive or even alarming, you're at risk of doing something that many people in the middle of genuine healing do. You're at risk of stopping, of concluding, just as something real is beginning to shift, that you must be doing something wrong, that this isn't working, that you aren't capable of change after all. And in that conclusion, you may turn away from the very process that was beginning to set you free. To understand why healing so often doesn't feel like healing, it helps to understand what the nervous system is actually doing, and what it has been doing, perhaps for most of your life. The human nervous system is not primarily a system for thinking. It is primarily a system for survival. Its deepest and oldest structures are organized around a single, non-negotiable priority: keep the organism alive. And in the service of that priority, it is extraordinarily adaptive. It learns, with remarkable speed and precision, what the environment requires, what is safe and what is dangerous, what must be expressed and what must be suppressed, what posture, emotional, physical, relational, is most likely to ensure continued survival in the specific conditions of the specific life being lived. Dr. Gabor Maté's work draws extensively on this understanding of the nervous system as a survival-oriented adaptive system. One of the central insights that runs through everything Maté has written and spoken about is this: the patterns we develop in response to difficult early environments are not pathologies. They are intelligent responses. They are the nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do, adapting to the conditions it finds itself in, finding the most viable way to maintain function and connection in an environment that may have been emotionally unpredictable, overwhelming, or insufficient. The child who learned to suppress their emotions in an environment where emotional expression was unsafe, that child's nervous system was not malfunctioning, it was problem solving with extraordinary efficiency. The adult who cannot rest, who cannot sit in stillness without anxiety, who stays in constant motion because stopping feels genuinely threatening, that person's nervous system is not broken. It is running a program that was written for a different context, a context in which constant vigilance was necessary, in which relaxing the guard had real consequences. And here's what this means for healing. When the nervous system begins to shift out of these long-held patterns, when it begins to release the chronic activation, the emotional suppression, the hypervigilance that has been its default mode for years, that release does not feel like relaxation, not at first. It feels like disruption, like destabilization, like something is being taken away that you didn't realize you were depending on. Because in a very real sense, something is being taken away. The structure that kept you functioning, however costly it was, however much it suppressed your authentic experience, provided a kind of predictability, a known way of being in the world. And as that structure begins to loosen, the nervous system goes through something that researchers and clinicians have observed consistently across many different contexts of healing and recovery. It goes through a period of reorganization. And reorganization, before it settles into something more integrated, can feel remarkably like chaos. The first sign: you're crying more and you don't always know why. This is perhaps the most commonly reported and most commonly misunderstood sign of nervous system healing, and it deserves to be addressed directly and honestly, because the misunderstanding around it causes real harm. Many people who begin genuine psychological healing work, whether through therapy, through somatic practice, through honest self reflection, or simply through the accumulation of life experiences that finally create enough safety for something to shift, report a period during which they cry more frequently and with less apparent cause than they ever have before. Not crying about specific things necessarily, not grief with a clear object, but a kind of ambient tearfulness. Emotions that seem to arrive from nowhere, triggered by small things: a piece of music, a moment of unexpected kindness, a scene in a film that touches something too close to something real. And the person experiencing this often interprets it as evidence that something is wrong, that they are becoming less stable, less capable, more fragile than they used to be. From a trauma-informed nervous system perspective, the opposite is almost always true. The tears that arrive unexpectedly during genuine healing are not a sign of fragility, they're a sign of thawing. They're what happens when the emotional suppression that has been operating as a chronic, low-grade, muscular and neurological effort begins slightly, tentatively, to relax. When the feelings that have been held below the surface, sometimes for decades, finally find enough safety to move. Gabor Maté's work on the mind-body connection speaks directly to this phenomenon. The suppression of emotion is not a passive process, it is an active one. It requires physiological effort, chronic muscle tension, altered breathing patterns, modifications in the activation of the autonomic nervous system. The body works continuously and largely unconsciously to keep suppressed material suppressed. And when that effort begins to ease, when the body begins to trust, however tentatively, that the feelings it has been holding down can be safely felt, what emerges is not weakness, it is the beginning of release. The tears don't mean you're falling apart. They may mean that something that has been held together through effort and suppression for a very long time is finally, gently beginning to let go. That is not regression, that is healing. The second sign: you are more tired than usual, and rest no longer feels completely impossible. This sign has two parts, and both of them matter equally. The first part, the fatigue, is the one that worries people, because fatigue, in a culture that equates productivity with worth, feels like failure. And fatigue that arrives during a period when you're supposedly doing better, when you're engaging with therapy or practicing new awareness or making genuine changes in how you live, feels particularly confusing. If I'm healing, why am I so exhausted? The answer begins with understanding what chronic nervous system activation actually costs. When the nervous system has been in a state of elevated alertness for years, when the stress response has been running at a low but persistent hum, when emotional suppression has required its continuous physiological effort, when hypervigilance has kept the body and mind in a constant state of low-level readiness, an enormous amount of energy is being consumed, silently, continuously, in ways that don't show up on any external measure, but that are, at the biological level, profoundly taxing. Many people in this state don't feel exhausted in the ordinary sense. They feel driven, activated, unable to stop. The chronic stress hormones that maintain a state of heightened alertness can create something that feels, deceptively, like energy. The kind of energy that keeps you moving, keeps you productive, keeps you useful and busy and functional, right up until the moment the system can no longer sustain it. When genuine healing begins, when the nervous system starts to downregulate, when the chronic activation begins to ease, the fatigue that was always underneath finally becomes felt, the body presents its bill. And that bill, accumulated over years of sustained activation and suppression, can feel overwhelming when it finally arrives. This is not weakness. It is not depression, though it can look similar from the outside. It is the body finally being allowed to do what bodies need to do after extended periods of stress: rest, repair, consolidate, recover. And here's the second part of this sign, the one that is in many ways more hopeful than the fatigue itself. Rest is beginning to feel possible. For someone whose nervous system has been chronically activated, for someone who has spent years unable to truly stop, truly switch off, truly allow themselves to be unproductive without the accompanying guilt and anxiety. The capacity to rest, even partially, even imperfectly, represents a genuine neurological shift. The system is beginning to trust that it can be still without something terrible happening, that it can be unproductive without losing its value, that it can be for a moment simply at rest and survive the experience. That trust is not small. It is, in fact, one of the most meaningful things a chronically activated nervous system can develop. The third sign: old emotions are surfacing that seem to belong to the past, not the present. This is one of the most disorienting signs of nervous system healing, and it is also one of the most misunderstood. You are in the middle of an ordinary situation, a conversation, a moment of solitude, an unremarkable afternoon, and suddenly you are flooded with an emotion that seems wildly disproportionate to what is actually happening. Grief that feels ancient, anger that has no clear current cause, a wave of loneliness that seems to belong to a much younger version of yourself, fear that makes no sense given the actual safety of your present circumstances. And you think, something is wrong. I'm getting worse. I'm regressing. I'm going backward. From a nervous system perspective, what is actually happening is something different. Something that researchers studying trauma and nervous system healing have observed consistently, and that the framework Gabor Maté has articulated so clearly helps explain. Emotions that were suppressed at the time they were originally felt, emotions that the nervous system deemed too large, too unwelcome, or too unsafe to be fully processed in the moment, do not disappear. They are stored in the body, in the nervous system, in the implicit memory systems that operate below the level of conscious narrative. They wait, held in physiological tension, until conditions feel safe enough for them to move. And when the nervous system begins to heal, when the chronic vigilance begins to ease and the suppression begins to relax, those stored emotions begin to surface, not because something new has gone wrong, but because something old is finally being given permission to complete its journey through the system. Somatic and trauma-informed therapists sometimes describe this process as the body finishing what it started. Emotions that were interrupted mid-process, cut off before they could be fully felt and metabolized, resuming their natural movement, now that the conditions finally support it. This is why the grief that surfaces during genuine healing can feel like it belongs to a much younger self, because in an important sense, it does. It is the grief of the child who never had the safety to fully feel it at the time. It is the anger of the adolescent whose anger was never allowed to exist. It is the longing of the person who needed something they never received and who, only now, in the growing safety of a healing nervous system, can finally feel the full weight of that need. This is not regression. This is integration. And it is one of the most meaningful signs that genuine healing is underway. The fourth sign: your relationships feel different, and not always in ways that feel immediately comfortable. When the nervous system begins to shift out of its chronic survival patterns, when the hypervigilance relaxes, when the emotional suppression eases, when the adaptive self begins to make room for something more authentic, the way you show up in relationships inevitably changes. And this change, as important and healthy as it is, does not always feel like improvement in the immediate experience of it. You may find yourself less willing to absorb dynamics you previously tolerated without question, less automatic in your accommodation, more likely to notice and sometimes name when something in an interaction doesn't feel right, more aware of where you end and another person begins. That quality of self definition that psychologists sometimes call differentiation. You may find that certain relationships that previously felt comfortable now feel slightly uncomfortable. Not because the other person has changed, but because you have. And the dynamic that was comfortable before was comfortable, at least in part, because it required nothing from you that your adaptive self wasn't already providing automatically. Gabor Mate's work consistently addresses this dimension of healing, the way that genuine inner change inevitably ripples outward into the relational field. One of the observations that appears throughout trauma informed relational psychology is that relationships organized around a person's survival adaptations tend to be stabilized by those adaptations. The people pleasers' relationships are organized, often unconsciously, around the people pleasing. The emotionally suppressed person's relationships are organized around their emotional unavailability as much as the other person's. When the adaptation begins to shift, when genuine healing begins to change the way you relate to yourself, the relational system feels that change, and the people in your life respond to it, often without understanding what they're responding to. Some will adjust, some will welcome the more authentic version of you with genuine warmth. Some will find, perhaps with some surprise, that a relationship with more honesty in it is also a relationship with more actual intimacy. And some will not adjust easily. Some will experience your changing as a disruption, as an implicit demand that they also change in ways they may not be ready for. And their discomfort with your healing, however understandable it may be from a psychological perspective, can feel to you like evidence that you're doing something wrong. You are not. The relational turbulence that sometimes accompanies genuine nervous system healing is not a sign that the healing is misguided. It is a sign that it is real, that it is reaching into the actual structure of your life rather than remaining at the level of private insight that changes nothing on the surface. Real change disturbs things, not permanently, not necessarily catastrophically, but genuinely. And the willingness to stay with that disturbance, to trust the process, even when it feels uncomfortable, is one of the most difficult and most important aspects of the entire journey. The fifth sign: you're experiencing moments of unexpected calm, followed immediately by the urge to distrust them. This final sign is perhaps the most quietly profound of all. And it is the one that most directly captures the paradox embedded in the title of this conversation. Genuine nervous system healing, as it progresses, begins to produce something that many people in the thick of it have never reliably experienced before: moments of actual calm. Not the absence of emotion, not the numbness that sometimes masquerades as peace, but a genuine embodied quietness. A moment in which the body is not braced, in which the mind is not racing, in which there is, for a brief interval, no emergency to manage, no threat to monitor, no performance to maintain. Just this, just now, just a simple, unremarkable experience of being present in your own life without a background hum of alarm. And for people whose nervous systems have been chronically activated, for people who have spent years in the low-grade emergency of survival mode, this experience of calm does not feel like relief, not at first. It feels deeply unfamiliar. And unfamiliar to a nervous system calibrated for threat detection can register as suspicious. There's a term in clinical psychology, window of tolerance, that describes the range of emotional activation within which a person can function without being overwhelmed or shutting down. For people with histories of chronic stress or trauma, this window is often narrow, and genuine healing gradually widens it. But in the process of widening, the nervous system sometimes encounters states, including states of relative peace and safety, that fall outside its established range of familiar experience. And what is outside the range of familiar experience gets flagged by the survival-oriented nervous system as potentially dangerous. This is why the calm that comes with genuine healing is so often immediately followed by the urge to distrust it. The thought, this won't last. The subtle waiting for the other shoe to drop. The odd discomfort of feeling okay, more okay than usual, and not being able to simply rest in it. The reaching, almost reflexively, for something to worry about, something to fix, something that restores the familiar activated state that, however costly, at least has the virtue of being known. Recognizing this pattern, noticing the distrust of calm as itself a sign of a nervous system in transition, rather than evidence that the calm is illusory, is a genuinely important moment. Because the calm is not illusory, it is real. It is the nervous system, tentatively and imperfectly, beginning to experience what safety actually feels like in the body, and learning to stay with it, to resist the reflexive urge to disturb it, to allow yourself to be for a moment simply okay, is one of the most meaningful practices available to anyone on this journey. Not because it is easy, because for a nervous system that has never quite believed it was safe to be at rest, choosing again and again in small moments to remain in the calm rather than flee it is an act of profound self trust. And self trust, built slowly and honestly in exactly this way, is one of the deepest foundations of genuine healing. There's something important to hold alongside everything explored here today. None of these five signs is a guarantee. None of them in isolation confirms that everything is moving in the right direction. Healing is not a puzzle where the appearance of certain pieces means the picture is complete. It is the living process, dynamic, non-linear, sometimes two steps forward and one step back, that defies the clean categories we tend to prefer. What these signs offer is not certainty. They offer context, a framework for interpreting experiences that might otherwise be misread as failure, a way of understanding the inner landscape of genuine nervous system change that makes it possible to stay with the process rather than abandoning it at precisely the moment it begins to do something real. Because that is the risk. Not that healing is impossible, but that people stop just before something shifts, just before the tears that seem to come from nowhere reveal themselves as the release of something long held, just before the exhaustion gives way to genuine rest, just before the surfacing emotions complete their journey and integrate into a more whole inner life, just before the relational turbulence settles into something more honestly connected, just before the distrust of calm begins slowly and tentatively to relax. Gabor Mate's work points towards something that every person who has sat with genuine healing work eventually discovers, not as a concept, but as a lived experience, that the body knows how to heal, that the nervous system, given sufficient safety and sufficient compassion and sufficient honest attention, tends toward integration rather than fragmentation. That the patterns which developed in the service of survival, however entrenched they have become, are not permanent features of who you are. They are responses to conditions that no longer exist in the same form they once did. And as those conditions change, as you build slowly and imperfectly the internal safety that allows the nervous system to begin releasing its long held positions, something becomes possible that may have seemed, from within the familiar activation of survival mode, almost unimaginable. The possibility of living in your own body without bracing against it. The possibility of being present in your own life without managing it from a careful distance. The possibility of resting genuinely, fully, without guilt or alarm, in the simple, unremarkable, profoundly meaningful experience of being here, of being safe, of being at long last at home in yourself. That possibility is real, not guaranteed, not immediate, not free of the difficult, non-linear sometimes bewildering work that genuine healing requires, but real. And it begins, as so many meaningful things begin, with the simple, courageous act of paying honest attention to what is actually happening inside you, without judgment, without rushing, without demanding that it look different from what it is, just noticing, just staying, just allowing the process, messy and quiet and real, to continue. If something in this conversation landed differently than you expected, if one of these signs felt unexpectedly familiar, or if something shifted in the way you understand your own experience, take a moment with that recognition. You don't need to have it all figured out. You don't need to know exactly where you are in this process or exactly what comes next. Simply noticing is enough for now. If you'd like to share what came up for you, the comments are open. Which of these 5 signs resonated most honestly? Which one surprised you? And if thoughtful, psychologically grounded conversations like this one feel valuable to you, conversations that take the inner life seriously without oversimplifying it, consider subscribing. There's much more ahead. Because understanding what is actually happening inside you, with honesty, with patience, and with genuine compassion, is always worth the effort. Always.